So, Rose, I'll start with you. Tell us. We just saw your story, but tell us more about what time of day was that? That was early morning. It looks like.
Yeah. Do I have how many minutes? I was going to start the stopwatch. You know.
Well, go 4 or 5 minutes. 4 or 5 minutes, please.
Okay. It's kind of surreal to see myself 30 years back. Now you all know how old I am. I was 20 back then. And took me that long to grow this hair. It's very saddening to somebody like me to be here talking about it, still worried about, not just about China, but I'm more... Instead of worrying about more massacres in China, I'm more worried about the massacres here and my daughter being shot in the school and my black musician friends being shot by the police. But let's go back to China back then. You heard what Zhou Fengsuo was saying. That was a festival of freedom. To me, I will always remember Tiananmen Square, as we call it, June 4th, as China's Woodstock being crushed by tanks. China's Woodstock without the mud, but plenty of blood. It was a very romantic movement, full of romances as well. You saw how I was dressed back then. We really treated it like a rock concert, even though very few of us had been to rock concerts. There were so many nameless people who are never photographed or filmed, who died for nothing, who were jailed for nothing, and the sadness, the irony of it all, it's really hard to describe. And for a nation, the journalists were talking about amnesia. And I hate to remind you guys about the amnesia in the United States. And I don't want to say more about that. We all know what it is about. The truth is so, so inconvenient for those who are in power in every country, really. And the truth, I was looking at the records on the Holocaust. The Holocaust started in 1933, right? Still, there's so many Holocaust deniers, and there are court cases, even in California, suing the deniers. And this is happening in the United States. Talking about the amnesia, and I don't know about them. 5 years ago, I procrastinated for 25 years, and finally I broke down in front of my therapist, who diagnosed me for having PTSD, and I had to even Google what it is about. And for myself, I wanted to forget it. I wanted to bury all that memories. It's just too painful to remember. And it pisses me off, sorry for swearing. It makes me angry that the consensus these days, quoted by many international media outlets, the gratefulness, the gratitude the Chinese should have for the Chinese Communist Party, talking about, it's quoted too many times that the Chinese Communist Party has lifted millions of people or hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. Hey, it's not them. We don't need to thank the torturers, the thugs who deprived us of that freedom, the basic freedom of making a good living. It's the Chinese people, the people in China and Chinese occupied countries that worked hard to make it happen. And I remember every time when I went back to China as a reporter, I was astounded. I'm talking about like in the far corners near the Three Gorges at a hot pot restaurant. I was by myself, and the woman who was running that food stall asked me all of a sudden what happened in June 4th in Beijing. We're talking about 10 years later when I was there. Because she said she wanted to know. She recognized I was somebody from overseas. and answering questions about if where our answers, our appeal, our pleas are answered or responded in China. People here, Zhou Fengsuo, Wu'er Kaixi, and I, we have been in touch with activists and dissidents in China almost on a daily basis. And very, very frequently, I'm approached by young Chinese inside China on Twitter. Usually, they get over the firewall on Twitter and ask me about it. Sometimes I have to ignore them because I'm too busy and there's too many requests. I get requests from high school students in the States who drove for 6 hours in deep snow to interview me because they want to know the history. And I don't want to occupy too many minutes. Good. Sorry. What I wanted to say here is that we can talk a lot about past. Right now is a very dangerous and exciting time, turning corner, landmark of world history. And thanks to the rise, I say thanks in a very sarcastic way, of course, to the rise of the right-wing politics, white supremacy, and more dictators like that orange turd, I don't want to say his name, I really, really don't want to say that name, is that the grassroots movements around the world are linking up. And we see the brave Hong Kong Democrats and the journalists here, the Tibetan activists here, the Uyghur activists here, and the many Americans and Singaporeans. The fact that this event is sold out is quite a statement, and I was astounded. For us to talk about Tiananmen now means a lot more to Americans. That's why the Americans who really want to know and approach us a lot more now. And another thing is that I'd like to remind the journalists and the world media have been on decline since I took the journalism course in Sydney in 1993. It's been going down the hill. I can't remember how many times I've been laid off, and ironically laid off by CNN. It's very visually traumatizing for the international media outlets, including the most notable institutions, the big institutions, to publish a lot of statements and whatever garbage said by those garbage politicians, including our orange turd, and having his photo and those right-wingers, the white supremacists' photos splashed all over the front pages, everywhere. And I and many of my American friends or international friends, we made a rule. If there's a headline photo of the orange turd or any of those, I call them the fuglies, the uglies, the F word and uglies, we refuse to share them. So please take note, because the mainstream media rely on social media activists like us to share your stories around. If you keep publishing those fuglies photos around, we refuse to share them, because the current stage is traumatizing enough for everybody, including kids. Kids are getting depressed. We're talking about 10-year-olds getting anxiety.
Rose has enough for now.
Yeah, so anyway, let me wrap up.
Right.
So please listen to us, the survivors' tales, and think about what's happening to you and to the United States right now. Thank you.